The title of our episode is The Brown Family News Conference. It was held earlier today in St. Louis, Missouri at a church. The rev-dr-al-sharpton, the national leader, was there. So was Mr. Benjamin Crump, the attorney for the Brown family, one of the attorneys. And a local attorney also was there speaking on behalf of the Brown family. Michael Brown Sr. was also there, and in fact he assisted in dealing with a blogger that was disrupting the news conference. And you'll hear Dr. Sharpton talk about this, and not as a heckler. This guy was a blogger. Now, one of the developments has happened here, including Ian Ferguson, the police chief, talked about this, is giving more accessibility to citizen journalists, as they are called. I don't usually use the term blogger. Now, a blogger is a writer, but you also have people that are like us that work in internet radio. Let's make a distinction between that. The podcasting movement, we'll talk just a little bit about that, is a different kind of movement, generally speaking, and there's a lot of things that evolve into podcasting. But now what has happened is Jerry Pippin, incidentally, who works with us, one of the people who pioneered internet radio. He was working at a radio station at the time, and it was simulcast. What happened there was the platform that was used was owned by one Mark Cuban, the man that owns the Dallas Mavericks. Used to be a reseller for Computerland. We remember Mr. Cuban. He was very accommodative in our dealings with him. Remember, he was on Prodigy at the time. But when he bought this platform, he would simulcast TV newscasts and radio stations was part of the service, and there was another service also, and I forget who they were right now, that came along after his simulcast. The big problem there was commercials, TV commercials. If you notice, when you listen to, say, for instance, the station in Ferguson, Missouri, the TV station at a Fox station, I forget what it's called, but anyway, they cut away when they do their commercials. They, generally speaking, can't do the commercials live on the internet. That needs to be updated to reflect the 2014 reality there. Now, the general acceptance of citizen media can be accommodated by accrediting these people. I know when we do work at the World Economic Forum, for instance, all journalists there are accredited by them, and it doesn't matter from henceforth you cometh, you can still get the accreditation. The problem is getting to Davos, but generally with these people, they can see who legitimate bloggers are, and or whatever they want to call themselves, that are covering news stories. This particular operator was just a disruptor. There are many people out there that write these opinionated blogs for one side or the other, and that is it. They do not try to capture the real events. What we try to do here is capture the events. So you heard old Bob McCutcheon there as he made his announcement and talked about social media, attacked social media in one big situation. Now, as Dr. Sharpton pointed out, he was a recipient of very favorable press coverage nationally. We alluded to that on the episode last night with the meeting by the anchors, Stephanopoulos and Paley, I believe is his name, from CBS, and there's one more that's missing here from NBC, the NBC franchise, with this killer Wilson and off-the-cuff remarks. Now, what the prosecutor did there was, the grand jury, first of all, most people know, but their proceedings are secret in camera. Star chamber type proceedings. If you've never been to one of these, If you go in as a witness, they have you on the list. You go and sat in there. You can decide to take the Fifth Amendment, or you answer the questions, and the prosecutor conducts the grand jury, or be federal, state, or local prosecutor. It is not the best vehicle. It's used many times by the federal government to just with the cursory amount. In other words, you only need just enough evidence that a crime actually occurred. So generally, in a capital murder case, you just need the autopsy and a declaration that Mr. Brown was shot and in the street. That in itself would trigger the going to trial a charge against Wilson. But what this guy did was misuse the grand jury to use it as a preliminary hearing. Now, in some instances, an agreement, as in O.J.'s case, they can decide even to waive the preliminary hearing there, and then they just basically have what's called more or less a show cause hearing, that the judge will bound the person over for trial. And that's a legal proceeding there, or they can have a preliminary hearing and decide by the evidence if this person is bound over for trial. But that does not say that the person is guilty of the crime. That is determined by a jury later in a full-blown trial. The grand jury, the way it was set up, these grand juries take on many cases. This one had been around since May. It was around before Michael Brown was brutally murdered there in Ferguson. So they decided to keep this grand jury, and I can just suspect that it took 9 votes. There were 12 of them, and probably more or less most of those people were older people or government workers or whatever that could literally serve that long there. Now, they don't necessarily meet every day, but they are in panel there. I think McCullough said that the Brown jury met 9 or 10 times to hear evidence there. But the evidence heard is numbers of witnesses. But see, the witnesses themselves are not known unless somebody says, I was a grand jury witness. Nor are the grand jurors known there unless they appear one day out of the blue. Those names are thrown out there. Or say, for instance, some grand juror decided to say, I was on the grand jury, and goes to media outlets. But back to McCullough. McCullough used it, and the Ferguson police, they put out what they considered to be damaging situations, such as Mr. Brown presumably had been smoking cannabis, but they tried to insinuate that he was in an agitated state. That was completely knocked down. But those kinds of things that were leaked to the media. Usually the local media works hand in hand, same thing with federal prosecutors. They have their media contacts, and they spoon feed them like little babies. And that is to be expected. But in this particular one, all kinds of information floated out there. And what McCullough did last night was said, well, the evidence did not support this. But that was not the issue there. He was not trying the case before the grand jury. It's just simply a more or less a show cause type situation where you say, is there reason to bound this over for trial? And that could have easily been done there. So what he was doing, and at the time that he announced at 8:30, he limped out. Evidently, the man has a limp. He limped or gimped or whatever you want to call it out there, and he was late in the night, 8:15. So by the time he finished up, people had digested what this character had to say. It was almost 9 o'clock. And if you watched it, the demonstrations were rather peaceful. But as they went on, there were some people there, and of course there was some fires. But you could expect that to happen. This thing was like a pressure cooker. And it's surprising that it's not still burning today. But there's not much left in Ferguson to burn. That's one point we have to omit in some of the surrounding communities. But there have been demonstrations today all over the U.S. at federal courthouses asking for federal action, not only on Mr. Brown, but various cases in the U.S. There's a need for a national law And Mr. Brooks, who heads the NAACP, talked about that. NAACP 100 years ago, an anti-lynching law would have eliminated this, but the push for national legislation, that will only happen if people continue a systematic way of protesting. We're talking about all methods here, writing people, petitioning people, marching, civil disobedience, closing down interstates. They have to keep this on the national fire burner, because you don't have to worry about it. The police will accommodate you. There will be a new murder every few days somewhere across the continental U.S. And we are continually having this to happen. And because of reporting today, and because of these so-called citizen journalists in communities that you've never heard of, many times somebody is shot and it doesn't make the national news because it's not a cause celeb. So, in other words, but these things are brought out. If you go to Nancy Lockhart, Dr. Lockhart brings about these cases from all over the place where somebody has literally been brutalized. Now, as far as the data dump that this guy McCullough used, big data, dumped it all out. That's a tactic there. We'll start to sift through that and throw it in some searchable database. That's what we do, and eventually get to the bottom of it. Now, I'm not sure how many documents he has there, but I can recall even with the Affordable Care Act, it's roughly, I believe, at least 2,500 pages. Now, I'm not talking about the rulemaking, just the act itself. We read it, 2.5 times. So that's roughly 5,000 pages. That's sort of the stuff we do. So we'll get to the bottom of most of this as soon as we get the data and start working on it, and at least do a perusal of it, see some sort of use an open source database to search it. I've been involved a lot in open data, and Missouri has a sunshine law there, so he used that as an excuse just to throw this stuff out there. But I would say that probably some of it, the names obviously have all been redacted. They've had time to, to work on this, to nurture this particular problem. So this is just not something that he threw out. Everyone in Missouri knew that they were not going to indict Wilson. That was known. Pawn shops were closed, guns were removed, etc. But obviously people are not fools. They will except, I guess, a few. If they were buying guns or whatever, they already bought the guns. They had not days, they had weeks to prepare if that's what they were doing. Citizens did buy guns, not to necessarily use last night, but for protection, they would say, especially in places like Popular, Missouri, rural Missouri. They've got the guns, but as far as I know, there was no activity last night out in their communities. So this is something hanging up. It's a national issue. One thing I would advise Dr. Sharpton to do now when he has press conferences, he never does have enough security there. They need to have much more security than what they had today at the church to deal with these rabble-rousers, infiltrators, or whatever they might be. And evidently that's what this character was, some rabid person there that set in there to attempt to cause a disturbance so his fellow types could talk about it. I saw it on, and Dr. Sharpton, as they say, nipped that very, very quickly. You'll hear that out there. So we'll continue to start looking at some polling and other things. The Attorney General, General Holder, also put out a statement today. We'll have that on our next report. So this will do it for us this afternoon. On the 25th, the Michael Brown Family News Conference. Oh, and one other thing, too. A lady pointed this, I didn't hear this, but evidently they had a camera on Mr. Brown's mother and father. And there were comments to the effect they should burn it down. Well, you have to understand, for those that have lost a son or a child, This is a devastating situation.